Welcome to today's episode of the Building Connections podcast of Planon. And with me today is Magnus Kuchler, who is country managing partner of EY in Sweden. Welcome, Magnus, and thank you very much for being with us today. Can you perhaps explain a little bit about yourself and what you do within the EY company?
Hi, Erik. Thanks for having me. So a little bit about me. I actually started working with facilities management back in the 90s. So today we'll talk about FM outsourcing, and that's very close to my heart. Started that 25 years ago and been doing over 150 deals as an advisor. So many of them, traditional power-based buyer pushed sourcing deals, but also pretty many semi-partnerships, as we call it, and also true partnerships using the vested methodology. So around over 20 of those deals to date. But I'm also working a lot with the workplace of the future, which is very hot right now with the hybrid model and, what will the future of work look like, but also the future offices. So that's what I do with clients. And EY is a big audit and consulting and tax and M&A advising firm. So internally in our firm here in the Nordics, I'm responsible for the business in Sweden. So that means that I'm also the client when it comes to facilities management, because we have 48 offices in Sweden. The biggest one where I'm right now, that's the Stockholm office, where we have over 1,800 people, down to the smallest office with just a couple of people. So we need facilities management services ourselves. So we have outsourced everything. So I'm also the client, but I'm also the advisor.
Okay, yeah, well, I'm quite aware of that because we met, I think, a few months ago in Stockholm when you hosted the WorkTech event in Stockholm at the time. And I recall that this, not only the facility itself is quite innovative, but also when we talked shortly about the way that you outsource FM services is of a certain innovative nature, so to say. And that's actually the topic of today, FM outsourcing and ways to think about it. Now, when I bring this back to the generic way that we see FM outsourcing being done in the marketplace, it always seems to me that these outsourcing projects are hard to contract, hard to implement, or they have some it's always a tedious or lengthy process, as it seems, in the generic way that is being done today. So what are the biggest problems in your view in making a good outsourcing deal, or how outsourcing deals are made today in a generic way? What's the biggest hurdle there?
Yeah, so just, looking back a little bit, the history of FM outsourcing is that, most companies did all these services themselves back in the 1900s. And then the single service started, outsourcing of cleaning or food or security and so forth. And then more and more going into integrated facilities management outsourcing. So that's been the trend, of outsourcing when it comes to FM. But when it comes to the problems and the challenges, I would say, first of all, that it's been pretty successful outsourcing FM because the main reason for outsourcing first, the first generation was very much to lower the costs. So if we look at most of the big FM deals, they have, dramatically lowered the costs. And it was also to increase the quality of the services. It's better to have an external company having FM as a core business, deliver the services instead of having your own people doing it. So it's not part of core business. So quality has actually gone up. And then also, when you do FM with internal people, normally you don't have any control over, what is the cost? What should the service levels be? What can our users and clients expect? And by doing the outsourcing, then you have clear contracts with all of that. So better control, and you can fast and in a speedy way understand, what service levels do we have and what is the cost. So all of that is pretty good. But when you then start to work in a more professional way with facilities management, what you see then is, as a buyer, you would like to have a supplier that is proactive, coming with lots of good ideas, more innovation. We know that there is a big technology revolution going on in all industries. The same goes for FM. So then you would like to have a supplier that comes with these investments, but also the ideas how you can provide new technology and how it can provide value. Also, you want more flexibility, because it's hard to know if we signed a deal for 3, 4, or 5 years. It's very hard to know how many people will you serve in 3 or 4 years' time. How many square meters will it be? How many offices will we actually have? So flexibility, and then also speed of change. So that means that the problem there is that most of the time, if you try to write all of those things into the contract, that it ends up with both supplier and buyer looking into the contract and starts to argue. Is it in the contract? Is it not? The price, is that included here or not included? And then you're not in the same boat anymore. So you're actually in two different boats, sometimes driving the boat in different directions. So those things are the big challenges, which of course we as advisors and also suppliers and buyers try to find solutions to. How can we sit in the same boat, provide the services, but also with proactivity, innovation, speed, and lots of technology implemented?
Right, because perhaps I'm wrong, Magnus, but when I seem to look at the market, how it still operates in terms of service outsourcing contracting, it seems still that price and price reduction is the primary, let's say, KPI behind any effort. And I wonder whether that's actually a sound starting point to say challenging, actually, because you're saying so much more than just price. You're talking about flexibility, innovation, that basically would demand an ability to invest on the service provider side into the collaboration as such as well. And that seems very hard to marry with a kind of scrutiny on the financial services cost price, or the price being paid for that. How are you looking on that subject in itself?
First of all, you are right, because traditionally, the main reason most of the time to outsource was to reduce cost. Then you have all the other things as well. So traditionally, you had maybe 3, 4, or 5 goals with doing the outsourcing. Price was the main one. But then when you followed up the contract and also the delivery and so forth, it was only on monetary and looking at the money. But that is changing a lot now, I would say, because the more mature and the most mature companies in the world, they know that they have a very competitive price, and that they are working in an efficient way from a buyer organization and also from a supplier organization. So they are looking into what's most important, which is, for instance, sustainability improvements, which is workplace experience and employee experience, and which is, productivity of your employees in the office. So that means that if you feel certain that you have a productive and cost-efficient delivery, then these companies, they're not focusing on the costs that much. They're focusing on the other things. And what we see now post-COVID is that we have companies, EY included, that say that we are fine with paying more for facilities management if you, dear supplier, can help us improve employee experience, workplace experience, and reduce CO2.
Right. So it's a great bridge into the approach you took on behalf of EY to contracting on services, facility management services. And I thought when we just shortly spoke about it at the event of WorkTech, it was immediately in my mind, it was something like, okay, this is actually kind of new thinking. So basically, I think the bottom line, or let's say the central point, is that you basically managed outsourcing by creating a different business entity where EY would be in and the service provider ISS is in, as a separate entity in between both organizations. Can you explain a little bit about your approach to this and what it means in practice?
Yes, so the starting point going into a true partnership and using vested was, of course, how can we get all the things that we're lacking, with the proactivity, innovation, focus on the right things, not, the input. We're not interested in man hours and how many people, we're rather interested in the outcomes and so forth. So if you look at the main problems, then is that the price model is not driving any of those things because the supplier would like to make more money and sell more hours and heads, and the buyer would like to reduce the costs. And it's nothing in the traditional price model that actually drives innovation or sustainability improvements and so forth. So that's one big problem, the price model. And the second big problem is the contract model or the relational model, which is normally a contract written by the buyers, legal people, saying that this is a very buyer-friendly contract. So we can decide everything. We can kick you out tomorrow, or we can have lots of penalties if you don't deliver, but if we don't deliver as a buyer, there's no penalty on us. So it's a very, one-sided contract and very buyer-friendly. That's where it all started. And of course, we ended up with lots of problems.
Yeah.
So vested and a true partnership is all around building a totally different price model, an outcome-based. That's a big difference between an outcome-based and an output-based.
Right.
Output-based is you can pay for a clean office, or you can pay for good food, or a secure office and so forth. Outcome-based price model means that you pay for the things that are most important for the buyer, and I will come back to that. So outcome-based price model and a contract, which is a partnership contract, or that's called a relational contract with invested, which means that you write the contract together, so it's good for both parties. And it's a win-win, lose-lose. And you also divide the risks between the parties in a sensitive and good way.
Yeah.
So to be able to move into a contract like this, a vested contract, then you cannot go out to the market and say, please, dear suppliers, come in with a proposal. And then we start negotiations and we push you really hard. And then we sign the contract with the ones that we pushed the hardest, which is a traditional approach. The approach, which is totally different in vested. So first of all, you choose the supplier by not knowing anything about what the future cost will be or what the future contract will look like. But you choose the supplier that you feel, this is the supplier that can be our future partner. And then when you've chosen the supplier, then you move into a co-creation phase where you create an outcome-based price model together. Buyer, supplier, and normally you have a neutral advisor making sure that you follow the right steps and no one falls back into old behaviors like using power or push the other party or start negotiating. So you co-create the entire price model, but also entire contract and the governance. So everything is done in true collaboration, which is a partnership. And then what you do is that you create a fictive company. It's not a joint venture. It's not 50-50 owned. It's still two separate companies, but you build a fictive company, and that's a facilities management company. And you have some people from the buyer organization in that fictive company, and the majority of the people is, of course, from the FN supplier. And that company should provide all the FN services needed for the sites and countries and services that you have decided to deliver.
So, and what kind of, and when you talk about fictive company, what kind of, let's say, legal model would that be? What kind of, how would that relate to a, let's say, standard entity in terms of legality?
Yeah, very good question, Erik, because it's still two separate companies. That's why it's called fictive company. But in the contract, it's very clear that you have one joint vision. So a vision, where do we want to go? That is, for both parties. But you also have guiding principles. How should we behave as a buyer and how should we behave as a supplier? So those guiding principles, there are 6. And some of the deals that I have made, they wanted to add 1 or 2. So it could be 7 or 8 guiding principles. But for instance, one guiding principle could be honesty, for instance. You need to be honest and open and transparent to each other. So if one party is breaking that clause, that's a contract breach as well then. So you build into that contract that we need to follow the guiding principles, we have a joint vision, and we also have the desired outcomes. And the desired outcomes is what are the most important things for me as a buyer. So in the EY ISS contract, for instance, we have one desired outcome around employee experience and workplace experience. That's super important for EY because we want to attract and retain the best people, and we want them to be super happy when they are at the office, of course. So that's important for us. Then, of course, it's super important with sustainability. So we are the leading advisor to our clients when it comes to sustainability. And of course, we need to take our own medicine.
Yeah.
And our employees, they expect that we are the leading company when it comes to sustainability. So in 2020, we were carbon negative and or neutral, and in 2021 we were carbon negative, and in 2025 we will be net zero. And that's a pretty big effort to be net zero in 2025 and negative 2021 if you're 350,000 people around the world.
Right.
So that's super important for us to reduce CO2. And of course, our FM supplier can help us reduce CO2. So that's important for us. And the third desired outcome is that we want this to be a competitive cost for this. So we measure the total cost of ownership when it comes to facilities management. And if our supplier can help us reduce the total cost of ownership, then they will get a higher margin. If they can help us reduce CO2, then they can get a higher margin. If they help us to improve employee experience, workplace experience, they can get a higher margin. So we are moving from, saying exactly this is how you're going to provide the services and we pay you per head or per hour. We're moving over to another price model where the supplier is sitting in the same boat as we, as a buyer.
Right.
So in this fictive company, we have a joint target, and that is to deliver the desired outcomes and move towards the joint vision that we together have.
Right, to zoom into that, because very interesting points that you mentioned here. You talk about margin. So the margin that's being made by the service provider is transparent between the parties, right? So in terms of the elements that you just mentioned, workplace experience, sustainability, that kind of thing. Let's move to sustainability. What elements of sustainability are currently in your interactions with the service providers to improve the performance on sustainability? What kind of tangible elements would play within that, let's say, not the contract, but within this collaboration with your service provider?
Yeah, so before answering, that part, I just want to, go back to what you said, that when it comes to the margin and the supplier. So of course, we have a total transparency between us. So the cost is the cost for the supplier. So we know the cost and the supplier knows the cost. And then we also know the margin that ISS is operating with. And that means that we are, as a buyer, we are fine with paying out a double market margin, because if we pay out a double market margin, that means that ISS and this fictive company have been delivering the desired outcomes, which is the experience part, the sustainability part, and the total cost of ownership reduction part. Right. So that means that the supplier can make more money, higher margins if they deliver. If they don't deliver, they get a much lower margin. So just delivering the services will not make the suppliers happy and not us as a buyer happy either. So win-win, lose-lose.
Yeah.
When it then comes to sustainability, if you look at EY, if we are 350,000 people around the world, where does our CO2 footprint comes from? The vast majority is travel. Airlines, cars, trains, buses, both traveling to clients, but also to the office and, between offices internally and with clients. That's the big thing. And number two is our offices. And offices, there we have everything from heating, cooling to cleaning, everything around the CO2 that is in the office. But what we see that ISS can help us with here is not only help us with reducing the office part. They are also helping us to together with EY, we're building a workplace of the future. So that means that if we succeed with our offices and also with a hybrid work, meet remotely like you and I think you're in Holland, I am in Sweden right now. We have a good meeting here, so we don't have to travel to each other, sit in the same studio. So if we can have really good offices, that will reduce travel as well. So that means that ISS can help us influence both the office part and the travel part. And we are now ISO certified, ISO 14001 certified. And the company that is gathering all the data from the offices, that is not EY, it's our vested partner, ISS. So they gather the data and they can then also come up with proactive suggestions. How can we reduce even more in this or that office?
Right. So, but the other side of this is that when you say, okay, we're going to provide higher margins for sustainability, but also for workplace experience, that actually implies that you have some kind of measurement around how am I going to measure this improvement of sustainability, but also workplace experience. Can you explain a little bit how you deal with basically grasping the effective workplace experience amongst the workforce as they work in your offices and at home, of course, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so when we started the contract, that was a couple of years back now. So we are pretty warm, together, and we work very good in a collaboration here. And when we started, we had the baseline because we had been measuring the user satisfaction, and then we added a couple of things into that and provided employee experience measurement. And then, so that's one thing. And then we also have internally within EY, we are measuring, how happy are our people. That can also go in there. And what we're doing right now, we actually just started the next phase of taking all the data we now have around the workplace of the future and working together, EY and ISS, to provide a new workplace experience index. And when that experience index is, co-created, designed, and also decided by the steering committee. And the steering committee, I'm part of the steering committee from EY side. We have a couple of people from EY side in the Nordics because this is a Nordic contract. And we have a couple of people from ISS. So when we decide that one, it will then also move into the new price model, an updated price model. So that means that we're now taking the version 1.0 of Vested that we have been working on for a couple of years. Now we see that it's time now to move on into version 2.0. So we will start working on some updates to the model, but also how we are collaborating.
Measuring employee experience is done by just asking people about their experiences, how satisfied they are. Kind of, is that questionnaire lists that you put in front of the employees?
Right now we have polls and surveys that we use, right. And we also do interviews with key people. But going forward, when we take it to the 2.0 and going more from the employee experience into the workplace experience, I think that we will add a couple of things. Not saying that everything is finalized and ready right now. We're working on it, and so in a couple of months we will know more what we'll add into that. But we are of course very interested in this as EY, as both the buyer here, but also EY as the advisor to lots of clients, because I've now done vested deals with 8 different FM suppliers on the market, and with lots of different buyers in different industries, some global contracts, some European contracts, some Nordic ones, and so forth. So we all companies are looking at how can we measure and also incentivize our suppliers on the most important things, which I think, is the workplace experience and the employee experience, but also sustainability and cost. So,
right. So, two questions for you before we end this. One, you talked about how you set up your workplace, and connectivity between buildings is going to, of course, like we are sitting today, is of course reducing perhaps travel patterns of your consultants between sites. If you can basically have good virtual means of connectivity between buildings, is that an element that is also basically being put into the arms of ISS, or is that an IT issue for EY internal only? How are you going about in this building connectivity and virtual spaces for virtual meetings and stuff?
Yeah, very good question, Erik, because when we work with future work and workplace of the future with our clients, but also internally, we have a concept that we call bricks, bytes, and behaviors.
Yeah.
Bricks is very much, real estate, facilities management, everything around, that part that we all know very much about when you work with FM. Bytes is all technology. So it's not only, the meeting room technology or all the sensors or the technology the FM suppliers using to, vacuum cleaning or what have you, but it was also all collaboration tools like how you use your laptop with Microsoft Teams or with the Teams chats, or how you work in a totally digital way. I'm, I don't have any notebooks. Everything is digital nowadays and so forth. So all of that is going into bytes.
Okay.
Helping me as an EY employee, how can I digitize and how can I work smarter and more efficient? And then we have behaviors, which is the third leg. And that's very much, how do we work in a new way? How do we build teams, strong teams in a hybrid setting where some people are out traveling, some are sitting at home, some are in the office? But also, how do we change leadership styles? Because old leadership with, control, I need to see you at the office Monday to Friday, 8 to 5. Otherwise, I cannot, steer and control you, their team or their employee. Shifting into a trust-based, totally different sort of leadership. So, and also the change management aspect of moving into a new office with a new leadership style and new ways of working. So bricks, bytes, behaviors very much interlinked.
Right.
And in EY, we are collaborating a lot with ISS in the vested agreement when it comes to the bricks part.
Yeah.
In bytes, we are doing some parts, ISS is doing some parts, and we collaborate on some parts. And when it comes to behaviors, so far mainly within EY, but I would like to see ISS do even more when it comes to training of our people, when it comes to how do we actually work and how do we work in this new totally flexible office and all of that. So so we in EY, we need to have people in bricks, bytes, behaviors, but you also need the supplier or the partner to be providing value in all those three dimensions.
Right.
And we have one new role now from 1st of July this year. In the Nordics, we have a new leadership role called Workplace Experience Leader for all work and all our offices in the Nordics.
Yeah.
So we're taking one person from our team that do these consulting towards clients, took him, Klaus, in Denmark, Christensen, and moved into this internal role to be the leader of then our internal real estate and FM organization, the parts of IT that is work related and office related, and the parts within the HR department, talking about the future ways of working and the transformation. So a totally new role that can keep this together. And of course, Klaus needs to collaborate very tightly together with our vested partner, ISS.
Well, Magnus, these are great insights, and I can imagine that the listeners would like to get in touch with you or the EY on this subject. How would they be able to contact you or EY when they're interested in learning more about this?
Yeah, I think it's just to contact me on Magnus Kuchler on my email or phone or LinkedIn, or any of my colleagues out there. But I would say right now we do lots of cool projects, but the interesting thing is that we do when it comes to FM outsourcing, we do a couple of really interesting old traditional FM sourcing deals. We do some semi-partnership deals, but we also do a couple of super interesting vested deals. So we are living in all those three, totally different models, totally different sourcing processes. So sometimes you get a little bit schizophrenic. So you really need to know where am I, in what contract and what client am I working with right now. But I see that the more mature you get as a buyer, the more mature you get as a company, the more you focus on your people and being, the future, modern company, then those are the companies moving more towards true partnerships. So I think they're here to stay and probably develop even more.
I think as well. And with that, thank you very much for sharing your insights, Magnus, with us. And to all the viewers, thank you for being with us. And we'd like to see you in the next episode again. Thank you.
Thank you, Erik. Thanks for having me.